class. Today we're going to be looking at 9.3, which is also solving quadratic equations. So it's the same topic that we started yesterday, only this time we're going to be using the method of square roots. Sorry, I kind of almost put a line through it. We're going to be using the method of square roots. So I call this method 2. Okay, this is just another method, kind of like the one that you did yesterday, which was graphing. Now, if we take a look at number 1, notice we only have the two terms. Now, we could go to Desmos and we could surely type this in, but isn't this almost ready just to solve? I mean, x squared is already alone. Couldn't we just take the square root of both sides? If we take the square root of the x squared, it just cancels the square. So we get x equals, and then the square root of 16 is 4, but we just have to remember that whenever we take the square root, we have to do plus or minus, okay? Now we could type this into Desmos. We could for sure type this in. We could go x squared is equal to 16. Now, if you notice, oh, my thing is, my graph was, the grid was a little bit messed up. But you notice we don't really get a full like looking parabola shape. Do you see how it just kind of looks like two lines? It's because we have this equals. So if we would actually put this as a minus 16, do you see how we get this as a better parabola? So if you're going to type it into Desmos, please make sure that you put everything to one side. Don't do it as the equals. But notice you get the -4 and the +4, okay? So you are welcome to use Desmos to check, but I want you to try the method of square roots, okay? So let's take a look at number 2. So in number 2, notice I have a binomial with no middle term. So why don't I just move the 27 over to the other side? So I get 3x squared is equal to 27. And then I'm just going to divide off the 3. And so I get x squared to equal 9. And then I'll just take the square root of it. And so I get x to equal plus or minus 3. And I'm all done. Now, again, I could type this into Desmos, but this is pretty fast too, okay? So why don't you pause the video here, and I want you to try numbers 3 and number 4 on your own, okay? Please stop after number 4. All right, hopefully you tried these. On number 3, did you divide off the -3? And so you got x squared is equal to 25. And notice we have another perfect number, so we're going to take the square root, and we're going to get x is equal. Remember, the square root cancels the square, and we're going to get plus or minus 5. So hey, we're just rolling right along. Let's take a look at number 4. We're going to move the 12 over, so we're going to subtract 12. We're trying to get this x squared all alone. And then just like we did in the problem above, we're going to take the square root of both sides. Now it just so happens though, I don't know what the square root of -2 is in my head. So I'm going to take the square root of -2. Uh-oh, what does that mean? Why am I getting this? I don't know what to do with this. So let's use Desmos. Now remember what I said though, with Desmos, I don't want you to type it in like this. I want you to move everything to one side. So what we're going to actually have to do is we're going to actually have to move the 10 over. So here's the original problem. That's the original. I'm going to move the 10 over, and so I get x squared plus 2 equals 0, or maybe we should call this y, okay? So let's go to Desmos. We're going to clear this other one out, and we're going to type in x squared plus 2, and if you want to put equals y, notice it doesn't change anything. Look at this parabola. Where is this parabola at? Does it cross? So the answer is no. So right here, when we go back to our problem, we see that this was a no solution. Do not tell me that it's a 0, because your parabola was up here. If you were to say 0, that means it crosses at 0, and yours does not. Now remember, when it tells you to solve, you're looking for the x-intercepts. You're not looking for the y-intercepts, you're looking for the x. So this one does not cross the x-axis, okay? So we say no solution. So I wanted you to see that one. Now let's take a look at number 5. On number 5, we're going to simply move the 15 over. And so we have 4x squared, and then these cancel. And then negative and positive would make a 0. Wait a minute. 0? What am I supposed to do now? Well, how about I just move this 4? So I'm going to divide off the 4, and these will cancel. And so I get 0 divided by 4. Oh, am I okay? Am I making a mistake? Let's just keep going. Let's take the square root. And then basically these cancel. And so I get x equals, what's the square root of 0? Square root of 0? It's 0. So do you put a plus or minus on that? Nope. So then this would be your answer. Do you see how this is a 0 where this one was not? Okay. In this particular case, if you're going to use Desmos, again, if you were to go back to the original, you would have to move the 15 that's on the right over towards the left. And what would happen is they would cancel out. So you would just get 4x squared equals 0. So if you go to Desmos and you type in 4x squared, look at where it sits. Do you see how it's sitting right there at 0? Now, if you don't move it over, if you try to leave it like this, do you see how it looks weird? Do you see how it's just this like weird straight line? So when you're doing Desmos, you have to make this almost essentially like a 0 or like a Y. It doesn't quite understand it in this format, okay? So even though Desmos is a fantastic tool, sometimes it's really not to your benefit, okay? So let's take a look at number 6. Now number 6, oh, this is kind of weird. I got a square here. So I'm a little confused. What am I supposed to do? Well, do you see over here how I worked to isolate the square term? And once I got it isolated, I just took the square root. Essentially, it is isolated. So what you can do is you can actually take the square root of both sides right from the beginning. This square root is only going to cancel the square. So it just cancels the square and it leaves you with x minus 1. So it just drops this down. But when you take the square root of 25, you have to remember that you're going to get plus or minus 5. You're going to get two different solutions. So you have to be really careful here. This is going to be an x minus 1 equaling a positive 5. And this is going to be x minus 1 equaling a negative 5. And then now you would just solve these. So you would move the 1 over. So we get x to be 6. We're going to move the 1 over. And we get x to be negative 4. Notice how my answer is not plus or minus. Do you see how they're totally different numbers? Okay. Again, let me show you Desmos. Now, when I show you Desmos, remember, we can't keep this 25 here. I'm going to have to move the 25 over to the other side. Okay. So let me pull it up and I'll type it in. So I'm using parentheses just like it had in the original problem. Whoops. And then I'm going to go raise, so I square it, and then I have to do minus the 25. Now that's a pretty big parabola, and if you want, I can zoom out. Do you see how I'm zooming out? So that you could actually see the vertex. See the vertex way down there? But what we want right now is we want these crossing points. So see, it's crossing at 6, and you notice it's crossing at negative 4. Okay, so again, I really do like Desmos, but you, one, have to know how to type it in. If you try to type it in just like this, watch what happens if I move, I don't put this minus, I put equals 25. Now let me just hit home. Now do you see, it does still give you the same answer, but do you see how if I were to zoom out now, look at that. Where's the parabola? It just looks like two vertical lines. So you do have to be kind of careful, okay, when you work with Desmos, that it doesn't understand sometimes full equations like that, okay? So let's try number 7. On number 7, notice we have this piece alone, so we're going to go ahead and just take the square root of both sides, and the square root is going to cancel the square. So on the left side, we're just x plus 7. And then on the right side, just like we did over here, we have to take the square root of the number. But in this particular one, the square root of 0 is just 0. There is no plus or minus. And so I don't have to split it. So now I just subtract 7, and notice I get one answer. So again, if we were to type this into Desmos, what we would be seeing is that it's crossing at -7, and it's just touching and it's going right back up. So it looks like that, okay? So why don't you pause it here and try number 8? Don't do number 9 because there's this 4 floating out front. But why don't you go ahead and pause it here and try number 8? All right, hopefully you tried it. And so we're going to take the square root of both sides. And the square root's going to cancel the square. So the square root cancels the square. And we're left with 2x plus 1. And then we got to take the square root of 36, which is plus or minus 6. And then now we're going to have two different answers because we have a positive and a negative. So let me rewrite this. It's going to equal the positive 6, and it's also going to equal the negative 6. So we're going to subtract 1, and we get 2x is equal to 5. And then we're going to divide off the 2, and we get a decimal. Well, I guess that's okay. It can cross at a decimal. Who said it always had to cross at whole numbers like it does over here, or it did up here? There's no reason it had to cross at whole numbers. It's just we haven't really seen decimals before or in this lesson. Well, let's keep going. We're going to subtract 1. So we get 2x is equal to -7. And then we're going to divide off our 2. And we're going to get x to equal -3.5. Oh, we got both decimals here. You know what I can tell you is if I would have tried to factor this by hand, this would have been really, really hard. Okay? Well, let me show you Desmos. I'm just going to go inside the parentheses so I don't have to retype it here. So 2x, and then this was a plus 1, quantity squared, and now I have to do minus 36. And watch as I hover over top. Negative 2.5. Now again, please, please listen. I cannot stress this enough. If you like Desmos, it is fantastic, but you are not allowed to use it on your SAT to get you into college. You're not allowed on the SAT. You will not be allowed to use it next year while you're in class trying to solve a problem. You're not allowed to use it on exams. Now, I know we're not having an exam at the end of this year, but be very, very careful with Desmos, okay? Don't solely rely on it, or it's going to hurt you next year and when you try to take this SAT, okay? So use it as a tool to check your work. All right, how about number 9? Now, number 9, the only reason why I didn't want you to try this one was because of this 4. You cannot take the square root right away. You do have to isolate this piece. So you need to work to get this parenthesis piece alone. So all you have to do is move the 4 to the other side. And because the 4 is being multiplied, we can just divide by 4. So we'll be left with x minus 3 quantity squared is equal to 9/4. Now I know that's not a pretty number, it's a fraction, but it's okay. I mean, there's nothing else I can do. So from here, now I would go ahead and take the square root of both sides, and the square root is going to cancel my square, and so I'm going to be left with x minus 3. And now I have no idea what that is off the top of my head. So I'm going to take my calculator and I'm going to go 9 divided by 4. And I get 1.5. Now remember, it is plus or minus 1.5. Even though this is not a whole number like we did up here when we took the square root of 25. Like remember when we took the square root of 25? This was a whole number. We still have to do the plus or minus even on decimals. Okay? So now we're going to have x minus 3 is equal to a positive, and we're going to have x minus 3 is equal to a negative. Okay, and now I'm going to move the 3 over, and I get 4.5, and I'm going to move the 3 over, and I get 1.5. And there are my two solutions. Now, are you noticing these last two problems were decimals? As we start to progress a little bit more through chapter 9, you're going to see quite a bit more decimals, okay? So just be ready for this. One other thing I just kind of wanted to mention about this comment right here with Desmos, you will be allowed to use your graphing calculator. So if you want to try to type these into your graphing calculator, you can try to play around with that as well. Do you notice how I just typed it in as the minus 36? I moved everything over, and then I can go ahead and hit graph. So the graphing calculator also can do these problems. It's just the Desmos, you get to hover your mouse over and it shows you the answer like right away. Where with the graphing calculator, once you have it graphed, now you have to go second, calculate, intersect, and then you have to move the little blinking star. So the graphing calculator can also get you these same answers. You can use the graphing calculator on the SAT, but know that there is a no calculator section as well. So, excuse me, notice how I solve these without a calculator. So it's really important that you practice the skills, because if it shows up on this SAT, or it shows up next year on the no calculator part, I don't want you to be stuck, okay? So I'm providing you with lots of different methods. Please make sure you're practicing, but using the technology as a way to check, okay? So that concludes 9.3 with solving by square roots.